Hello BookTube. It's still October and I'm still in the mood for Halloweeny vibes in my reading, but I am now horrored out after my last vlog. I don't really want to read any more horror for the foreseeable future. I'm going in a slightly different direction for the rest of my reads for October, and I'm going to spend the next week or so reading monster romances. My relationship to the romance genre generally is still relatively fresh. I only started reading romances maybe in like 2023. Started off with my love of the Last Binding trilogy by Freya Marske. I went into that expecting fantasy, came out obsessed with the romances in those books. My first foray into monster romance, which I never thought I would really be interested in reading, was I think last June. I was taking part in a Pride themed month-long readathon, and I kept getting a prompt which was to read a book by a pansexual author or with pansexual representation, and it's really hard to find authors who are openly pansexual. And a lot of the authors that I was coming across, I didn't have access to their books, so I was trying not to buy new ones. So I was trying to read things that were on my TBR or on Everand, or I could get through the library, and there just wasn't a whole lot available to me. And so I ended up picking up Feed and Insatiably Yours by Aveda, who is a pansexual author of monster erotica. I had a great time. And I want to tell you, the world building in those books was actually so good. I didn't go into reading a monster erotica novel expecting to come away really invested in the world building, but I was. It's kind of set in this modern day 21st century world, much like our own, except monsters live alongside humans. There's loads of different types of monsters. They're all like in the workforce and on apps. And it was just a really fun, playful, creative world that I enjoyed being in. I enjoyed reading about. Hello, you. Hi. Hello, baby girl. Are you excited for monster romance? That's why I sat down here today, because I thought you might be able to finally see my cat. I don't pick her up on camera. She doesn't like being picked up. The only other monster romance book that I've read was earlier this year. I read That Time I Got Drunk and Saved a Demon, I think it's called, by Kimberly Lemming. That one wasn't so much of a success for me, unfortunately. Like, no shade to you if you love that book. I definitely still recommend it to people that want a book that doesn't take itself seriously, but it was just far too silly for me. The book is fun and it doesn't take itself too seriously, and I can see why people enjoy it for that, but it was just a bit too goofy for me. The cognitive disconnect between like all of this colloquial like modern day slang and this like high fantasy world with demons, and yeah, it just didn't work. It didn't work for me. It's been a mixed bag of reading so far with monster romance, but I'm in the mood to try it again. I don't know. It's just the time of year. I'm in the mood to read about monsters, but I don't want to read horror. So, I mean, monster romance it is. So I have a couple of books available to me on my TBR and on Everand and things. So I'm just going to go through with you what I'm planning to read in this vlog. The only book that I have physically is Thea Guanzon's Tusk, which I think is a 2025 release. I haven't read from this author before. I think she's the author of The Hurricane Wars, but I haven't picked that up. I have heard good things, but I haven't picked it up. The reason I got this is 2025 for me has been the year of T. Kingfisher. I started reading T. Kingfisher fantasy for the first time this year. I picked up the newly published editions of the Saint of Steel series because they're just so gorgeous. I'm obsessed with the covers of those books and I fell in love with it. I love that series so much, and I was looking for something that really gives me the same vibe. Picked this up in Waterstones because just look at the cover. Just look at her. Stunning book. And I picked it up, read the first page, and it just transported me to that place, you know, like it just gave me those T. Kingfisher vibes. I picked it up and I've been dying to read it ever since. The premise of this book is you have Guinevere, who is a merchant's daughter. She has been betrothed to the son of like a wealthier family to kind of raise the station or the standing of her family, and she's en route to the town or the city or whatever where this family lives to get on with the arranged marriage and all that. And then her caravan is set upon by bandits, all of her guards are killed, and she is rescued by our male main character, Oscar, who is a half orc. And she doesn't really have any choice but to team up with him, who also is in a kind of precarious situation. His apprenticeship's come to an end, he's lost his mother, and so he's on this quest to try and, I think, find some long-lost family. So they team up, go on this adventure together, and it just sounds like a really great time. I think the author was commissioned to write this or approached to write this by Critical Role. I've never played D&D, but I have watched like the most recent D&D movie that came out. I've like engaged in some D&D content and media and enjoyed it, so I think this is going to be a really fun time. Going back to my monster romance roots, I want to read some more books from Aveda. Feed and Yours Insatiably are short story, novella, and a novel. So a novel with like a companion short story that follow the same two characters. And then she also has, in the same world, Skin and Inextricably Tied. So Skin is like a companion short story or a prequel short story to Inextricably Tied. Inextricably Tied sounds like it's quite messy. It is a poly romance, I want to say. I think it's MMF. It is a banshee, a gargoyle, and a night terror, whatever that is, or whatever that looks like. I really don't know. So that's going to be really interesting. But we're following Harbinger, who is a banshee, and in this fantasy world, banshees have this ability, I think, like a kind of psychic ability, like anyone they touch they become connected to, and she can then feel the emotions or the innermost thoughts of the people that she's touched. So she lives a very isolated existence because of this ability, until I believe she accidentally touches her bodyguard, who is a gargoyle, and they become connected in some psychic kind of way. And then I don't know, they shack up with a night terror, whatever that means. I don't know. I really, really enjoyed Insatiably Yours. I thought it was great. So I'm excited to read from this author again. Then the final book that I want to read for this vlog has been getting so much buzz online, and that is When the Tides Held the Moon by Venessa, Vida, Kelley. In 1910s New York, following an orphaned blacksmith who I think is commissioned to create a tank for this traveling circus, gets kind of caught up in the circus. I think he becomes part of the circus and discovers that they are using the tank that he's built to hold a captive merman that they have kidnapped, essentially. He starts to develop a bond with this merman, Rio. The friendship kind of blossoms into something else, and so he has to make a choice, like choosing Rio or choosing this found family in this, like, the circus. I've heard wonderful things. To be fair, all of these books, I was looking before I filmed, all of these books have got like really high ratings. So I'm very excited. I feel like this is going to be a really fun time. As limiting as monster romance might seem as a genre, I feel like we're going to get lots of different vibes. I feel like Tusk Love, like I said, is going to give me that kind of T. Kingfisher coziness and world building, but still be a little bit saucy. Inextricably Tied is going to be like straight up like polyerotica by the sounds of it, but with monsters. And then When the Tides Held the Moon, I really don't know who the target audience is for that, but I think that's going to be very lyrical, very beautiful, and going to be quite deep in its themes. I'm really excited to pick up all of these books. Torn between starting Tusk Love because it's the one I've got physically, and also reading Skin because I think it's like 80 pages long or something. And then I can get into Inextricably Tied because I'd like to read Skin before I start that book. Feed set up Insatiably Yours really well, so I feel like Skin will set up Inextricably Tied really well as well. Those are my plans for the vlog, and I'll let you know how I get on. Hi, I apologise for the terrible lighting. I'm just in bed. I've started reading Inextricably Tied on my Kobo. One of the MMCs in this book His name is Jasper Flint, and he is a gargoyle whose skin turns into rock armor. And his name is Jasper Flint. Just sit with that for a minute. Reading update. I have now finished Inextricably Tied. I did want to pop on and update you before I finished it, but this week has just been too busy. I haven't had the time to film an update. And also, I didn't realise going into it, because I was reading it on my Kobo, and I have it set to show me the percentage read rather than the number of pages. I didn't realise how long it was. The first book I read by Aveda was Insatiably Yours, which is like less than 200 pages. Inextricably Tied is a 400-page book, and I was reading it and I was like, why is this taking me so long to get through? It's because it's 400 pages long, that's why. But because of that, there is quite a bit more world-building stuff in Inextricably Tied versus Insatiably Yours. I didn't end up liking it as much as I did Insatiably Yours, and so for that reason, I'm giving it a 3.5. I did still enjoy it, but I think with these novels, what Aveda is doing, which is quite fun, is combining monster romance with some other sort of genre or some other trope. But in Insatiably Yours, you have a fantasy world monster romance, but it's also a workplace romance. Like Averin and Pi, the main characters, are sort of workplace rivals, whereas with Inextricably Tied, you have a monster romance, a poly-monster romance, tied with a murder mystery crime book. And I struggled a little bit with those two disparate things coming together. Let me better explain what Inextricably Tied is about now that I've read it, because when I first went into it, I just kind of skimmed through the blurb, so I didn't have a really strong sense of what the book was going to be other than poly-monster romance. You have the setup of Harbinger and Flint, who are a banshee who has a psychic ability to read the past from objects, but she also can't touch other people's skin, because if she does, she becomes emotionally connected to that person for the rest of their life, and she will always be able to feel whatever they're feeling and be able to tell the emotions that they're experiencing. So she hasn't touched another person for like 7 years, and in the novella that sets up Inextricably Tied, she and Flint get into a situation where they accidentally touch and they become connected. And through that happening, Harbinger realises that Flint has romantic feelings towards her, which allow her to acknowledge that she also has feelings for Flint that she's been suppressing because she can't touch anyone. They embark on a sexual relationship because they may as well. Yeah, they've already touched each other's skin, they're already going to be emotionally connected for the rest of their lives, so may as well start sleeping together. Why not? At the start of Inextricably Tied, they are called to a meeting with officials from the OID, which is kind of like a fictionalized sort of FBI situation from what I gather. They're an investigative division that are looking into the disappearances of these young girls, ages from like 13 to 17. Very early on in the book, they manipulate Harbin into touching this object. She doesn't realise it's part of a creature that they have pulled from the mind of their chief suspect. What you get there is a very strange dynamic immediately off the bat, because Agony, this third partner, is a night terror from the mind of a potential serial killer. Harbin and Flint are very suspicious of him. He has a natural inclination towards evil and is attracted to people's fears and their nightmares because that's what he is. He's a night terror. His whole purpose for being is to terrorize this man Reed in his dreams. So they spend half the novel with him like in chains in their company, which is I don't know. I guess that would get some people going, but for me I just found it very odd that they then were able to move that into a romantic direction. I did enjoy though that Flint struggles with his feelings towards Agony, not because Agony is a man and he's a man, but because Agony is evil. And that's what makes him struggle with the fact that he has feelings for Agony rather than it being a struggling with his sexual identity. Am I a gay man? Am I a queer man? Like, what is this kind of situation? I enjoyed that. Once Flint gets over the fact that, yeah, Agony's background is nefarious and questionable, he's able to just lean into the fact that he has romantic feelings for this creature, and the fact that he's a man isn't really a big part of it, which is nice, because I feel like in a lot of romances you get the trope where one character is kind of coming out and hasn't realised his attraction towards men at this point, and that forms a central part of the conflict of the novel, which can be a bit tiresome. It's nice in some respects to see people going through the experience of coming out and realising their sexual identity like later in life, but it's not very fun when that's like always the trope. So it was nice to see that Flint didn't bat an eyelid about being attracted to a man. The problem is the man in question is an evil night shadow creature. The other thing I struggled with a bit was just like I said, the two tropes or the two genres coming together. The disappearance of the girls is just incredibly sad, and it was well written in the sense that I really felt how troubled Flint, Harbin, and increasingly Agony were with the investigation when they weren't getting any leads. They really wanted to provide answers to these girls' families, and when they weren't getting anywhere, that was incredibly difficult. All of the families had been failed by the OID, this investigative division, who aren't really treating this with the care that they should have been. But also the final sequence where the plot unravels and you find out what's happened to the girls. It's so sad. And I don't think I want to go into a monster romance and feel really sad. That genre lends itself to being a silly, fun, good time. And combining it with the deep emotional trauma of all of the characters, first of all, and second of all, this epidemic of violence towards girls and the mystery unravelling in such an upsetting way, really made it difficult for me to know how to feel. Because on one hand, the book wants you to be really horny because there's sex scenes all the time between these characters and they're increasingly falling for each other. And then on the other hand, you've got this really deeply sad mystery about missing teenage girls. But yeah, ultimately I still enjoyed it, and I really do like the world that Aveda Weiss has built. I found out, I didn't know this, but there is another novel duet set in the same fantasy world around the different characters that you get introduced to in Inextricably Tied. So that's cool. I probably will end up picking those books up at some point because I do like the care that Aveda Weiss has built the world with. She hasn't just gone, let's write a silly, fun monster romance that, you know, is completely unbelievable. The world is very developed. All of the creatures that you're introduced to feel fleshed out. It's nice that you get an intriguing fantasy setting as well as it being like a fun monster romance. Would definitely read more from Aveda Weiss in future. I just didn't love this one as much as I did Insatiably Yours, which still touches on dark themes, like Averin struggles with these feelings of otherness. The type of monster that she is a succubus, and they're still very much not accepted by this society. But I feel like Aveda Weiss really ramped that up with Inextricably Tied in a way that made me confused. I didn't know how to feel for half the novel. I have now started Tusk Love. I started it last night, but I only read about 25 pages before I got sleepy. So far, it's very tonally different from Inextricably Tied, which I thought it would be. It is very much giving that T. Kingfisher cozy fantasy kind of vibe, even though we open in quite a dark scene where Guinevere's caravan has been set upon by bandits and she's in like mortal danger. It's already setting itself up to be like kind of grump sunshine leaning, but I think it's going to be like a little bit more complicated than that. The characters already seem to have quite a lot of depth. I just think it's going to be a super fun, fluffy, cute time. Very excited to carry on reading this one. I'm enjoying my time with it so far. The setup in the first 20 odd pages has been really enjoyable, so I'll let you know when I've read a bit more. Checking in with another little reading update. I have now finished Tusk. It was not a very long book, a little under 300 pages, and I loved this one. I thought it was fantastic. I was having a great time from the first page, and so I'm giving it a 5-star. I loved everything about this book. It was a really easy 5 stars for me. I had no gripes with it whatsoever. I had a fantastic time from beginning to end. I thought that the relationship between the two main characters was completely charming. It is quite grump sunshine at the beginning, but soon Oscar kind of lightens up in Guinevere's presence, and they just have such a lovely bantery dynamic together, and I was just completely charmed by them as a couple. The overarching mystery as to why Guinevere's caravan got attacked is really interesting. Can you stop scratching the sofa? It's definitely not the most involved or complicated mystery ever, but it doesn't need to be. This isn't a mystery book. But it was nice that there was a compelling and interesting plot to propel the story along other than just the romance. The pacing of the book was great. It never felt slow or dull, and equally it never went too fast to the point where we didn't really get any proper development of the characters or the relationship. Everything felt really natural and it flowed really nicely. I think some people might read this and find it to be a little bit tropey, but honestly, I think that was part of the fun of it. Yes, it's a bit grump sunshine. Yes, at one point there is only one bed. But do you know what? This is just such a great time. I've compared this a lot to the Saint of Steel series by T. Kingfisher, and I actually think that I liked this more. I haven't given any of the books in that series a 5-star because sometimes I do find that T. Kingfisher's pace is a little bit meandering, and the pacing of her books and her plots is a little bit not quite as snappy as I want it to be. Also, the smut is not really her strong suit. It's not where her talents lie, and sometimes the scenes do feel a little bit cringe, whereas in this they felt really natural, they were really fun. It was really sweet to see Guinevere sort of come into herself as a young woman. Her parents very much want to keep her in this bubble so that she's naive and easy to manipulate, and it's nice to see her come out of that shell and really blossom into this really cheeky, flirty character who is full of life. I think that was reflected really nicely in the sex scenes in this one, so I didn't find them to be awkward or poorly written or anything like that. The writing was really solid throughout. Ultimately, yeah, I ended up liking this one more than the Saint of Steel series, but they definitely did give me the vibe, the T. Kingfisher fantasy vibe that I was looking for. If you have been a fan of that series or T. Kingfisher fantasy generally, and you're looking for a romantasy, I would really recommend this one. I have started... What have I started? Wednesday, what am I reading? I have started When the Tides Held the Moon by Venessa, Vida, Kelley, and I'm a little bit more than halfway through now. It's been a little while since I updated you, so my apologies for that. I wasn't really sure about that book in the very beginning because Benny plays a bigger role in the capturing of Rio, the merman character, than I realised going into the book. And so I had a similar reaction to it, interestingly, as I did to Inextricably Tied, where one of the characters is a captive of the love interest characters, and I wasn't really sure if I was going to vibe with that in a romance setting, if I felt like a power dynamic was going to be manipulated there in a way that I didn't enjoy. But it very quickly changed my mind, and I am actually really enjoying it now. I think that I can finish it either tonight or tomorrow, actually. It's quite a long book. It's like almost 500 pages, I think, but it's another one where the plot is moving along at a really nice pace. It's not dragging, and I'm interested to see what comes next. Benny and Rio's relationship is actually really lovely. If you take away the subtext of, or the context of Rio being captive in a circus, essentially. And the background of bigotry as well that kind of informed circuses to begin with. Like, a lot of the characters they're differently abled and they're not treated well because of it. Benny is Puerto Rican and he isn't treated well because of it, on top of being a queer boy, which is something that he suppresses about himself. Despite the unpleasantness in the background of the relationship. Benny and Rio are incredibly sweet together, and they treat each other with a lot of tenderness, which is really lovely. I'm gonna hop off now, I think, and carry on reading When the Tides Held the Moon, see how far I can get this evening, see if I can maybe finish it. Because I'm over the halfway point now, I find that I tend to barrel really quickly towards the end of a book, especially a bigger book. Once I hit the halfway mark, I'm like unstoppable. I had reservations at the beginning, I'm now like very invested in the story, and I'm really enjoying where we're at. So yeah, I'm excited to see what comes next, and I will let you know when I finished it and what my thoughts are. Final update of the vlog. I've now finished reading When the Tides Held the Moon, and I can definitely see why this is such a beloved book. I did end up really enjoying my time with it. I've decided to give it a 4.5 star. I did really enjoy the book, especially towards the end. The ending of the book is pretty fast paced. There was a bit of a section in the middle that felt like a bit more of a slog. It felt like the pacing was a little bit uneven throughout, but the ending was really successful, I thought. You kind of know going into the book that eventually Benny is going to be confronted with this decision of what to do about Rio's captivity as he builds this close relationship with the other performers and becomes concerned for their future of their livelihoods and their well-being, versus obviously Rio being in captivity. Those things are obviously going to come to a head. I found Benny's naivety about Rio's captivity to make me lose a bit of faith in the relationship at certain points. It felt hard to root for them as a couple when one of them is in captivity and the other one is sort of dithering about what to do about it. So at some points I was very frustrated by Benny's character, and it's very human, of course. Like, I think his predicament is very understandable and his reservations about what to do are understandable, but at the same time, given that the context is a romance story, it felt difficult to root for Benny at times because of it, which stopped me from loving it as wholeheartedly as I did Tusk Love, the book I read just before this. The other thing that really stopped this from being a 5-star read for me was the proprietor of Luna Park, Sam Morgan, is a very cartoonishly evil character with very little depth. I find a villain or an antagonist so much more compelling if they are more complicated, and Sam had no redeeming qualities whatsoever. He was just presented as evil through and through, and I find that characterization is a little bit boring to read about, and it's also just not very accurate. Reading about characters like that in fiction takes me out of the story a little bit. I prefer it when an author wants you to feel more complicated feelings about somebody who is a very morally bleak character. But overall, those are kind of more minor little things that stopped me from enjoying myself as completely in the moment, but they didn't hamper my overall enjoyment of the book come the end. The amount of research that Venessa, Vida, Kelley did into this period of history in this very specific place, in this very specific circumstance of a Puerto Rican queer boy emigrating to New York and being in this melting pot of a city in this particular time period, was really impressive. I really did feel like the sense of place was very strong. Having read the author's note at the end, it's really obvious how much care and research the author put into writing this story, which I always appreciate and I think always comes through in the reading experience. Puerto Rico isn't somewhere I know much of anything about really as a place. I don't really know a lot about its relationship to the States or its colonial history. It was nice to see that represented in a book, and to see Benny's experience of otherness being tied to multiple facets of his identity and exploring the intersectionality of being a queer person but also being a person of colour in this environment. Combining that, I think, with the idea of this like traveling sideshow attraction business that was flourishing at this time, and how that became a refuge for people who were othered and didn't conform to society's expected norms, and therefore became a place for other people of colour, disabled people, queer people. I really liked the way that the author explored that. I think it's a subject that you have to be really delicate with because of the kind of sordid history and the history of exploitation that goes alongside like circus performance. I think the author did a fantastic job of treating all of the characters with a lot of dignity and a lot of grace. Some of the performers were really hard to like at times, and they made a lot of mistakes, and they were morally grey, and they were complicated people. And so it was just a little bit disappointing that the proprietor, who is, for all intents and purposes, the villain of the book, wasn't given the same treatment. I think that would have just like edged it up a little bit for me and made it more of a favourite. Hi, I'm filming. Please be careful of the tripod. It's interesting that I've read 2 queer mermaid books in such quick succession, because even though they are very tonally different books, it was interesting to see the comparisons between When the Tides Held the Moon and Chlorine. I'm really enjoying books that explore queerness through that sort of folkloric lens, using the motif of a mythical folkloric creature to explore queerness. If anyone has recommendations for more books that do that, I would love to hear them in the comments. Even though I had a couple of minor gripes with the reading experience, I would still really recommend When the Tides Held the Moon. I thought it was a really unique and special story. We've really gone on a journey, I think, through monster romance, but the opposite way you'd expect. So I started out with the smuttiest monster romance I've probably ever read, went to like a pretty vanilla middle of the road spice level to like absolutely no spice whatsoever. If you're looking to dip your toe into stories involving monsters and romance, this is a great place to start if you're intimidated by reading anything that's particularly spicy. Or if you're just not looking for that in your reading experience at all. I'm someone who can kind of take it or leave it. If you're gonna put it in, you've gotta make it have a point. I don't like to just read smut for smut's sake. So I think it's gotta kind of enhance something about the relationship between the characters. There is a brief discussion in the book about physical intimacy and what that would look like for a merman and a human, but it is very brief and not very explicit whatsoever. A good one for people who are newer to the genre, or people who are interested in monster stories or mythological stories that don't involve a lot of spice but still have that element of romance to them. Overall, my favourite book of the vlog is definitely Tusk Love. I really enjoyed that story. I had no complaints with it, no faults, no notes. Just the perfect, sweet, cozy, with a little bit of action, romance, fantasy. Like, there's nothing wrong with it. It is just an absolutely solid romantasy book. When the Tides Held the Moon, a little bit longer than it needed to be, I think. Could have maybe shed a couple of pages in the middle there. And then Inextricably Tied, a good time, but tonally very confused. A book that wanted to be 2 very conflicting things at the same time. I hope you've enjoyed my little foray into the world of monster romance. Do I think I'll be reading more monster romance in the future? Possibly. And I wouldn't say never again. Looking forward to filming more vlogs and seeing what else I get around to reading before the end of the year. Until then, stay safe and happy reading.